I can feel a lightness for sure.
Uh-huh. And ask her if she'd like to leave that time and place with you.
Yeah, and the location is so specific.
Where?
It's in a house that I lived on in St. Thomas it was just particularly. Hi, I'm Gabby Reece. I'm a retired professional volleyball player and co-founder of XPT Fitness and Laird Superfoods. On this podcast, we interview experts about the latest in health and fitness so you can maximize performance in all areas of your busy life. And today I'm talking with therapist and conflict resolution expert, Dr. Richard Schwartz, who also created internal family systems. Listen, we all deal with conflict every day. Sometimes it's at home or within our professional career, at the office. Other times it's that moment when you're cut off while driving. But how often do you find those moments of conflict derailing your entire day or even week? This vicious cycle of conflict spiraling is something that most of us are never taught how to break out of, which is why I brought Dr. Schwartz on to the podcast. He is an expert in conflict resolution and is going to share real world strategies for managing conflict better so that you can stop fixating on what's wrong and start focusing on what matters the most to you. It's also about the third show I've ever cried on. Welcome to the Gabby Reece Show. Let's go. Dr. Richard Schwartz, thank you for joining me. And I know you like to be called Dick, so we'll keep it at that. But I always say that someone who has worked as long as you have in this field and done as much work as you have, we're going to at least officially introduce you and welcome to the show. And thanks for visiting with us.
Thank you, Gabby. I've been looking forward to it, and I'm honored to be invited.
So in doing the homework in IFS, internal family systems therapy, you really created this kind of approach to therapy. And the way I was introduced to you actually was there's, no bad parts, which I feel if we could tell each other that in any type of relational way, that sometimes that's like such a powerful first step towards everybody being their best selves.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's been a tough sell in this culture because there are so many parts that get vilified. And so it's been quite a journey to try and convince people of this. Yeah.
What was happening in your life? Because I always feel like no matter what, even if people are trained in certain educational systems and institutions, that really something personal occurred with them that prompted. For me, when I see IFS, it's like something was happening in your life that you created this.
Yeah, I think what happened was my training's as a family therapist, and I was one of these obnoxious family therapists that thought we'd found the Holy Grail, and that people who were doing intrapsychic work are wasting their time because we could change all that by just reorganizing the families. And so I set out to prove that and did an outcome study in about 1982, and found that that wasn't true. I could reorganize the family just right, and these kids didn't realize they'd been cured because they kept binging and purging. And out of frustration, that was devastating to me. It was like, prophecy failed. I just, I had this kind of maybe I'm wrong about my life's path moment. So in that sense, there was a kind of crisis, and out of that place, I just started asking these clients why they kept going. And they started teaching me this model that now it's gotten to be very popular. But I owe it all to that moment where I had to shift and really just get curious instead of assuming that I knew how to change everything.
I feel like get curious is such an important thing forever. It's so interesting. I talk to my husband a lot about this is also God forbid, you know, a little something that can really put you in a place that's so dangerous because you stop getting curious. And I think that approach of staying curious, especially when, hey, you went to school, the authority to be open to learning and doing that. Can you just compare, maybe give a snapshot of what maybe a session with you or the intention of your work in the before IFS looked like versus the approach and how it changed?
Yeah, so before I would gather the whole family together, and I would be observing these patterns of dynamics in the family that in many cases would scapegoat this bulimic kid, and were ways to avoid dealing with the parents' marriage. That was one scenario. And so I would try to get that to change, and I would have the couple talk to each other and not triangulate with the patient. And like I said, I could do that pretty successfully. And this my hero Salvador Minuchin claimed that he could do that with anorexia, and it just would these kids would stop doing it. And so, but it wasn't happening for me. And at first, I thought I'm a loser. I just can't do it right. But then, like you say, I just got curious, and that was the key. And at that point, I had a big advantage because I hadn't studied psychodynamic therapies. So I had to come to what my clients were telling me with what the Buddhists call beginner's mind. I didn't have a lot of presumptions about these parts that they were describing, and I had to let them teach me about them.
So if let's say a family came to you 10 years ago based on this different approach, how would you do that differently compared to sort of the original technique?
So now when I work with families, uh, I'm having everybody, we will look at the same kind of patterns. But if I were working with you and your husband, for example, and I don't know if you have kids, but
I have 3 daughters.
I have 3 daughters too. Um,
I need it.
I know mine are a lot older than yours, I'm sure. So anyway, I'd be observing how you guys interacted with each other, and especially in conflict, and what happens when somebody's upset with somebody else. But instead of directly trying to say, okay, now you stop saying that and say this instead, I would be saying, okay, I want you, Gabby, to focus inside and notice what comes up when your husband says this. What part of you gets triggered by that? And then I would have him do the same and notice what protective parts of him are coming to the fore, and so on with anybody in the room, and have everybody start to do what we call a U-turn in their focus, so that rather than, most of our protective parts want to blame the other person or focus on them as the issue. And so this reverses all that. And we get to know the parts that are doing the talking in the room. And then there's a process by which I can have you ask that protector to give you a break and relax back, or you can speak from this entirely different place that I call the self with a capital S. And if I can hold you and your husband and your daughter in that place, I don't have to do much more because you guys would work it out. So that's how I would work with a family now.
This podcast is brought to you by Maui Nui Venison. So I think I got our first Ohana box as a present about 4 years ago. A friend of ours sent it to our house. There it was right at the door. Nothing better than that. And it was a gift. It was a thank you gift. And right then, when I learned more about the company, I became a paying customer. And I've gotten my Ohana boxes ever since. And the thing I really appreciate about this brand is I'm always looking for clean protein that I can feed my family and myself that I feel good about. And this truly is the only wild harvested red meat that's available. Secondly, it tastes great. It's so easy to use. I use it like any other protein that I cook. Again, it shows up right at your house. And they have other beautiful broths. They've got some jerky, 10 grams of protein for about 50 calories. And it's not gamey. I think that's the other thing is sometimes we do get wild meat from friends if they hunt or do anything. And sometimes it's a little gamey. And this has none of that. And it really is something that is so nutritional, easy to use, comes to your house. And again, the environment that these animals are in are incredible. It's like the most nutritional place. It's got volcanic rich soils, remarkable plant, wild grazing that give Maui Nui venison that high protein per calorie. And it, again, delicious. You can use it like you use any other meat. So it's not gamey, really clean. And we even share it with our friends at XPT. So let's say we do an event, we will share the products with people that we are close to. So it's not something we just use in our house, but we share with our friends and family. So if you have been curious about Maui Nui venison, all you have to do is go to mauinuivenison.com/Gabby or use Gabby at checkout, and they will give you 20% off your first order. So that's mauinuivenison.com/Gabby, MAUINUIVENISON.com. And don't forget to use the code Gabby, GABB at checkout for 20% off your first order. You know, I have kind of two grown daughters, almost 30, and a 20-year-old, and then I still have I have a senior in high school. And of course, inevitably, and I think families don't realize it, and I put it in quotes, even when you're a good family, and I don't mean a family that has a lot of zeros. I mean, people, no one's drinking, no, it's relatively healthy, the house is clean and safe. Families go through things. Things happen. Things that you don't want to happen. It's unavoidable. You think going into parenthood that if you do your job, you'll be able to avoid a lot of things. And certainly I've had to learn this personally, going through some things with specifically one of my daughters, but they all have their phases, as you know. And it was such an interesting idea because originally it's sort of like people think, oh, something's wrong with the kid. We're going to drop them off and fix them.
Right.
And then you realize it's an entire family dynamic. And even if there's been an event like a trauma for real that isn't even from the inside of the house, still everybody has to get involved. And at first, when you're seeking help, you feel upside down because it's new and you don't know how to get good help.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think what happens is once you embrace what you're talking about, that part of you that's trying to make everything okay or protective. Mm-hmm. And once you embrace like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. Maybe I need to do some listening, whatever that is. I do think that gets easier.
Much easier. Yeah. And ideally the therapist would help you do that. And
yeah.
And that was the big revolution of family therapy, was saying, no, you can't just take this kid out of the context of the family and work with the kid without trying to change the family dynamics, because this teenager is going right back into the family and it's going to be triggered by the same stuff. So you have to work with everybody who's involved. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very humbling and it can be quite liberating.
Yeah.
Once you find that place, I've always said too, like if parents could learn to be a safe place for all of that, I think the skills that we would give our children would be pretty exponential. If somebody, let's say somebody isn't going through a harrowing time, because unfortunately sometimes it's the emergency situations that force us to get into like learning and new tools. But let's say you're parenting and you think, I'd like to incorporate some of these practices just to do this better. Mm-hmm. How would you suggest a parent not only learn for themselves, but then maybe in the ways that they could teach one of their children sort of how to identify this?
Yeah, that's one of our goals these days, actually, is to bring this out of the therapy office more and make it more available to the public in general. And so we have a number of initiatives in that direction. One of them potentially is AI, which I have no idea what to do with. But seems to have some potential for that. But there are books that I've written and other people have written for parents and for the public on this. And uh, as you mentioned, there's that workbook coming out.
Yeah,
So
so you have a workbook that people actually can pre-order on Amazon. It's not out till later in this year. And I think people undervalue the importance of workbooks and writing things down.
yeah, I mean, just the act of writing takes you inside and makes you listen more, and then trying to put that out on paper externalizes what's in there, and it makes it a lot easier to get some perspective on, because it's not right in your face all the time. It's out on this page. Yeah.
Yeah. You talk about in IFS that there are certain populations that can kind of benefit the most from some of these techniques, and there are these root causes that are internal. Maybe we could just talk about that, because I think, listen, they teach us a lot of things in school, but there's a lot of things they don't teach us, right? They don't teach us about communication or dealing with trauma and suffering, and whatever, finances. There's just a lot of stuff they don't teach us. What do you think, even people who are doing okay, what are the things that, if they were like, you know what, I like to create some buoyancy in my emotionality,
Mhm.
what would be an interesting way to start looking into that?
Yeah, in some ways, it's the opposite of what we're taught as kids or in this culture. And I know you were a great athlete, and it'd be interesting to hear how you were taught to deal with what happens to you, injuries or emotional pain or failures. But most people, this being a kind of rugged individualist culture, are taught to just move on from the pain or the sense of failure or the yeah, the sense of worthlessness that comes with the slings and arrows of life. And most all of us can't get out of childhood without some kind of trauma of some sort. And when that happens, again, my belief is we have all these different parts, and some of them are very vulnerable and young. And before they're hurt, they're these playful, loving, open inner children who are so creative, and we love being with them. We love having them inside of us. But once they get hurt because they are so sensitive, or they feel terrified by something that happened, or they carry this kind of shame and worthlessness, then we don't want anything to do with them, and we try to move on from them, thinking we're just moving on from the memories of the trauma, not realizing that we're actually locking away inside our most precious qualities just because they got hurt. And then other parts of us have to spend a lot of time trying to keep all that contained so that we don't get triggered and don't have to feel that all again, the flashback of it. And so we spend our lives being more careful and managed in our lives, and we don't have access to all the joy in those parts that we locked away. So some of what we're trying to do is get people to reverse that, so that when you do get hurt or terrified, you go to the pain or the fear and you embrace it and you listen to it and you help it feel your presence and how you can take care of it now. And it's not going to be locked up. And in the moment, you can actually unload the fear or the sense of worthlessness, and and then you don't wind up so split off in your life and like that. So that's we have initiatives in education along those lines, and yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by Bon Charge. I've been using my red light therapy mask for about 5 months now, and just 10 minutes a day. And red light therapy, it really works. What happens is it penetrates deep into the skin to boost collagen production. It reduces inflammation and just kind of eases those signs of aging. What I love about it, it's so easy to use. You can use it right at home. So it's like a little mini spa session right at home. Because my feeling is, listen, I have to be hydrated. I need to sleep. I'm going to try to make good nutritional choices and I'm going to move my body. But to have something that supports kind of my beauty daily, my daily beauty routine that is easy to use, it doesn't hurt, I can do other things. I really love that idea because I know feel good, look good, but sometimes look good, feel good. And if you've been curious about the red light face mask, now is the time. You can start adding Bond Charge's red light face mask to your daily routine. All you have to do is order one today at bondcharge.com. So if you go to bondcharge.com right now, my listeners will get 15% off site wide. So no matter what you order, they have a lot of really cool products. I personally got some headphones as well. And at the end, when you go to bondcharge.com, all you do is put in the code Gabby. So not only will you get free shipping, but you will get a 1-year warranty. So that's BONCHARGE.com. And don't forget to use my exclusive promo code Gabby at checkout for a discount applied site-wide. It's interesting, the No Bad Parts title, because I think, and I didn't grow up with a ton of expectation around me. I love the saying, if you were that person, you would act exactly that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, obviously I've come to really be grateful for all the lessons. I didn't always live with my parents when I was very young, from 2 to 7. And then during that time, my biological father passed away. So I sort of took on stoicism very, very early.
Yeah.
And then I married somebody who's very emotional and in a good way, not necessarily combative, but definitely confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's sort of pulling the weeds every day.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, like, what was that look and what's going on? And you could also say it,
Mm-hmm.
like, you could say, well, I'm feeling like this. And that sort of feels like an ugly thought or feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And Laird would say, yeah, that probably seems pretty natural, right? Given the situation. So what was very helpful, rather than toughing it out,
Mm-hmm.
was being able to say, hey, this is hard, or I'm uncomfortable, or I'm jealous, or I'm scared, or whatever the million things are. And someone going, yeah, it seems like it's okay.
Yeah.
The thing I'm interested in is, we have a group now, though, that every little push and, like, ow, those words trigger me. I have anxiety. So maybe where is the language between the two, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, suck it up, move on, versus everything is offensive or going to hurt us. Because if you just look at life, nature, it's savage, it's difficult,
Yeah.
it's the way it is. How do you have the conversation of sort of knowing, like, hey, you've honored your feelings, and guess what? You also have to sort of figure out ways to move on.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, our culture, it is either or, basically. So either you're very stoic, like you were,
Yeah.
and nothing bothers you, which isn't true, but you don't feel it, or these parts that have been so hurt in the past get triggered, and then they totally take over, and you live from that place, and you feel like a victim all the time, and you act like one. So that's the way it's been in our culture. And what I'm offering is kind of a middle path there, because I'm saying that there is this self in you who has all these great qualities. It's inherent in us. It's our essence. It gets blended with these parts or covered over by these parts when they get so upset. But if you can, in the moment, help the part separate from you, and then you be with it in a comforting way, then you become the parent to your own inner children. And then they don't need that from your husband or your somebody in the outside world. And you can still speak about it. You can still feel it, and then say, in fact, you were saying you've learned to say, I feel scared, or I feel, and that it's so great that Laird is his name, that
Yeah.
he can be accepting of that. What we find is if you add the phrase, a part of me feels this or part of me feels that, that's even easier for people to hear. And it automatically kind of separates you from that part that feels that way so that you can become the primary caretaker of that part of you. So we're kind of giving responsibility for taking care of themselves back to people, but also with a method for doing that that's pretty clear rather than just kind of moving on from it.
I think that's such a beautiful distinction as a part of me. It's even like when you're in a relationship and you sort of say, hey, when I'm in this situation, I feel like this versus when you do this, feel like that. It's just like, hey, this situation or this is how I respond. And there's something where it feels, even for yourself, like you're not attacking yourself.
Hmm?
You're just like, hey, this is just a part of me that's feeling this. It's not all of me.
Not all of me. That's a big, big distinction. We're training a bunch of coaches, and they can't be therapists, but just helping their coachees use the language and think of themselves this way is a big intervention.
Yeah, that's a big one. One of the things I love about exercise and eating well and all these things is you spend some time learning about biology, right? And there's things about us biologically that are in deep conflict sometimes with our emotional selves, right? Oh, a little worrying about things in the future that haven't happened, but really, biologically trying to be on high alert so that you're going to stay alive. And, all these things that exist. Oh, overeating when maybe there's food available, but it's because we weren't really set up to be in this abundance. So I think there's sometimes, I wonder if you ever talk with people about a lot of the things I think we feel are so natural. We live in a world that it doesn't always make sense.
I'm not didn't quite get that. So
Well, so for example, being hypervigilant
mhm.
is in some ways a really biological, natural way that a human being should be. What's that noise? What's over the hill? Who's coming? I don't know when I'm going to get food again, so I'm going to eat everything that's in front of me. I think that there are some certain things within us that is natural that we don't understand.
Yeah,
Uh,
now I
is
think I get it. Yeah,
Yeah, is natural, and then it's even feeling like when people feel a sense of anxiety, that alertness, that acuteness had a place.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, evolutionarily, we come as a species from some times where you really did have to be on guard all the time, and so we have that heritage. Even if we live in a context now where you don't need that. The other thing is that often for people who've had really tough childhoods, there was a time in their life where they constantly had to be hypervigilant, and they have parts that are still living back then. They're living in those scenes. They think that they're still 5 years old, and they think the other shoe is going to drop any moment. And it did back then. And so these parts did have to be hypervigilant when they were that age. And they don't ever shut down because uh, no one's ever helped them out of where they're stuck in the past. And so a lot of the time, when I'm working with somebody who's got panic attacks and is hypervigilant constantly, yeah, there's some reason, the world isn't safe all the time, but this one doesn't have to be on duty constantly. So if I was working with you and you had that, I would just say, ask the part where it's stuck in the past with all this fear and wait and don't think of the answer. Just wait and see what comes. And you might see yourself stuck in a particular scene that was very scary. And then I would ask, Gabby, how do you feel toward that younger part, toward that young girl who's still living back there? And ideally, we would get you into a place of compassion for your younger self And you could actually enter that scene and take her out of that and help her unload all this fear. So that's a lot of the IFS isn't just kind of mindfully observe your emotions. It's actually go to them and help them transform.
Because a lot of this, it is connected right to our nervous system and even some type of hardwiring, some type of loop in our brain. Is there something about that physiologically we are, by doing that, we are also kind of making those shifts? Because I think a lot of us are aware, and it's like you just can't get there on
Right.
your own.
That's right. Yeah. What I find is these parts are very connected to our nervous system. So a lot of the problems people have with their limbic system and so on, they think are just about that. And the solutions they think are just to find ways to calm themselves, like external ways. And that can be helpful. But as long as these parts are living in these dangerous places in the past, that's only going to do so much. And until you can help them, like if I were working with you and I might have you ask the hypervigilant part of you how old it thinks you are. 90% of the time you get a single digit. And then I would say, okay, well, let the part know you're not 5 anymore and see how it reacts. And a lot of times these parts are shocked. They really think you're still 5 years old, and they have to protect you in the way they did back then.
It's so interesting. I've always felt 30. Even though I'm like, now I'm 54, I still am like, I'm 30, but when I was 15, I felt 30.
That's funny.
So I mean, maybe that'll serve me now. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so you talk about parts like memories, sensations, beliefs. Maybe we could also just talk about, so people can sort of start to think about that for themselves. What the parts, what does that mean?
Yeah. So for me, memories, sensations, and beliefs and emotions are what we call trailheads. So if you told me you had a certain kind of emotion or belief, and I had you focus on it, just on that, and then stay with it, you would wind up finding the part from which it's emanating. And by part, I mean subpersonality. So it's my belief that we're born with these subpersonalities that uh, have all these valuable qualities and wonderful resources for us in our lives, but that, like we were saying, as you go through life, they they're forced to shift out of their valuable states into protective roles, or some of them get locked away, like we were talking about. But there's still these wonderful personalities, inner personalities that have just been forced into these extreme roles, and they're forced into these extreme roles because they're frozen in time during bad events that happened, and they pick up these extreme beliefs and emotions that came from those events and attach to them almost like a virus that we call burden. So they get burdened by the belief that the world is always very dangerous, or by the belief that you're worthless, or something like that. That now is what the part thinks is true. And once a part is willing to let go of those beliefs and emotions, they'll transform back into their naturally valuable states. So that's what I mean by this is a model of transformation. But the bigger deal about IFS is that as I was exploring all this, I kept running into people who, once they got separated from some of these parts, would shift into this wonderful state of pure curiosity or compassion for the parts or confidence relative to them or so on. They're what we call the 8 C's, C words of self-leadership. And when they were in that state, they would know how to relate to these parts in a healing way. Without any coaching from me, really, they would just start to do it. And so now, 40 years later, we can safely say that what I call the self with a capital S, is in everybody, can't be damaged, knows how to heal, and is just beneath the surface of these parts, such that when they open space, pops out spontaneously. And so a lot of the work is helping. If I were working with you, I would help you enter that state and then have you begin to interact with these parts. And you would be telling me what they're saying. And I would give you little pieces of advice, but mainly you would be the one that they're listening to and relating to, so that you become that primary caretaker.
Well, and then, yeah, because then you're with you all the time and you have that to lean on and it's your language. It's a beautiful thing. For people who don't know, the 8 C's are compassion, curiosity, clarity, creativity, calm, confidence, courage, and connectiveness. And what's funny is when I hear that, we use the word love a lot, and I love you, and I think we sometimes don't really value the power of love, even given to ourselves. Like it almost like the light that gets rid of the darkness, and we do the opposite, right? Like, oh, I'm so dumb, and why did I say that, and I'm not good enough, and all these other things. But if we can shift it, and I'm not talking about denial or grandiose love, but this sort of true love that so much does get taken care of and works its way to the surface and to healing when we're able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is a self-compassion, self-love movement that I value a lot. The question becomes, can you really love this critic who's calling you names all day? Or can you really love the part of you that makes you an addict? Or can you really love, you know, I, the, I didn't trust that there were no bad parts until I worked at a treatment center for sex offenders. And I started working with those parts and tried to get to know them and where they were stuck in the past. And, it turned out they were just trying to protect the, the, the offender back when he was a child,
Mm.
and he was being offended against. And this part said, how can I protect? Well, I'm going to take in the energy of this person who's hurting me, and I'll use that energy to protect from that person. And then it gets stuck with the desire to hurt vulnerability and so on and so on. Uh, so it is possible to love even parts like that, to be open to them. But first, you got to learn what happened to them to make them what they are before you can love them. You can't love them for the kind of things they tend to make you do. Do you follow what I'm saying?
100%. What about the scenarios? Because I think there's people who they can really point to something that occurred or an ongoing
Mm.
trauma or situation. What happens when you have people that come in and you hear that maybe, is it 14? Is it 9 generations? Sometimes we're carrying around things in us that it may not even be fully us.
Yep.
So how do you unpeel that onion? Because I would imagine that that's almost harder and more nuanced than something like, hey, my dad used to beat me, or I was sexually assaulted by the neighbor, or, those very kind of easy to point to things.
Yeah. So this has become a big topic in our world, and it's something we call legacy burdens. So these are the beliefs and emotions that come down through the generations, like you're saying, that come into you, usually through your parents, because they were carrying them, and then you absorb them too. And I just stumbled onto that, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, as I was, part of the work with these parts is to ask where they're stuck in the past, and then you would see scenes. And some people were seeing scenes that weren't from their life, like you said. They'd be seeing scenes that were clearly from ancestors. And so we figured out that, yeah, they do come down through the generations. Now, this is surprising, but in some ways, those burdens are easier to unload than the ones that came from your direct experience, because the source of them didn't happen to you. And so all you need to do is ask the part if it would like to unload this, if it doesn't want to keep carrying this. And if it says yes, then we can actually send it out and sometimes involve ancestors. That's a whole different sort of spiritual side of the model.
I had an experience not so long ago. I was gifted a session with somebody very different. It was more about breathing. And, they ask you a little bit about yourself. And I always have issues. I mean, obviously playing volleyball, it's easy to say, oh, my knees, right? But there is something, I think we all know where we harbor our tension. People say, oh, my traps. For me, I know clearly it's in my hips. I can feel if I'm under stress or I'm experiencing, I'll get you almost get inflamed or acidic in these areas, things like that. And so I was sort of saying, hey, yeah, from playing sports, but I also know that's probably where I tuck everything in, right? And armor up. So there's a stiffness. And so it was interesting for me because I hadn't done that. And he said, oh, it's interesting. You have like wooden legs like your grandfather. Right.
Wow.
And I thought it was so interesting because my grandfather's grandfather, my father was from Trinidad and my grandfather was a doctor at the Port of Spain. So very educated, very rigid, because his grandfather was a slave from Barbados.
Wow.
Right. So you can imagine the messaging from my great grandfather was, you're going to get educated. You're going to hold a line. And he goes, you have wooden legs. Like you've carried on maybe your family's kind of, he's like, it's not even your thing, know? And so I knew I had heard about things like that and it really dawned on me. But anyway, we went through a series of breathing exercises and sort of asking, saying thank you and sort of like, you can go on now, whatever. And I remember since that one visit, I feel a little different. Even physically, it isn't as much emotional for me. It's just more kind of feeling a little looser.
Yeah.
So when we talk about parts, are there specific parts like the spiritual part of us, the child in us, the physical us, or how do you, when you're trying to teach somebody to sort of identify parts, what does that look like?
You want to try it, or you want to role play it, or you want to?
Sure, I'm open. I have nothing to hide.
Okay, fantastic. So is there a part of you you'd like to get curious about and get to know better, or do you want to focus on your hips and see what's down there, or what would you like to do?
I think the thing that comes up for me a lot is I'll use being productive maybe as an avoidance
Got
to
it.
just kind of being or looseness or I won't say playfulness, but maybe a little bit of that.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. Let's go to your productive part. You ready?
I'm ready.
So focus on that impulse to work or produce something and find it in your body or around your body.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you find it?
For me, it's like right in, like almost, it's in my pelvis. It's like down right in the center, like a rock.
Great. And as you notice it there, how do you feel toward that part of you that's pushing all the time?
I've associated feeling grounded by it, by feeling, I use it to center, which would maybe be almost like a control or fight or flight type of avoidance.
Well, we don't have to speculate on that, but just
Okay.
right now, you value it. It helps you get grounded. Is that right?
Yeah, but sometimes then there's not, no, because it's too heavy. You need lightness and
Okay, so there's another part that says
it's
that's
limiting.
it's limiting. Yeah, it's
It's
not the best
limiting.
way to be grounded.
Right.
So we're going to ask that part to give us a little space for a little while because we first just want to get to know this productive one. So ask that one to relax back and see if you can get back to being curious about the productive one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
and ask what it's afraid would happen if it didn't try to do this for you, make you so productive. And don't think of the answer, just wait and see what comes.
It's like, who's going to be in charge?
Okay.
Who's going to drive the vehicle?
Okay. So it's been driving your vehicle for a long time,
Yeah.
and it doesn't trust there's anybody else who could do it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, just ask it if that's right.
It's more of like it's a habit.
It's saying it's a habit?
Yeah,
Okay.
versus I have a lot of strong people in my life.
Yeah. Okay. So, but how are you feeling toward it now as you get how hard it's been working to drive the bus?
I think that it's like tired.
Yeah. So let it know you get how tired it is
Yeah.
and see how it reacts to that compassion.
Yeah, it's like it's unnecessary, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. So ask it if it were possible that it could relax more, would it like that? If you could help it relax more.
Yeah. It's sort of like the energy's ready to do something else at this point.
Okay. Yeah. It's tired of being in that habitual role all the time.
Yeah. It's limiting. It just feels like it's it's that thing that like you've done that.
Yeah.
Like there's new things to do.
So that's coming from this productive part. Is that right? I just want to be sure it's
Yeah.
not. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
because I guess what I sense is, hey, yes, it works, but it doesn't actually. It's limiting too. So
Yeah.
it's working, but it's a real limitation.
Yeah. And that's true of these protectors when they're in these roles.
Yeah.
So ask if it really trusted it didn't have to do this and that you could drive your own bus, your own vehicle,
Mm.
and it was freed up. What might it like to do instead inside of you?
Kind of move to a place of seeing what happens,
Yeah.
like not knowing where you're going.
Yeah. Kind of live in the moment more.
Yeah.
How does that sound to you, Gabby?
It's funny. The first word that comes to my mind is so typical me. It sounds really smart.
Yeah.
But the point is that it should go past that. It should be, the notion of free. But
Yeah.
of course, because I do that, right? I'm like, oh, that's smart. It's like, okay, well, even let that go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another part. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, just
Just to be free.
the notion of whimsical, like even the sounds of word, like the word whimsical. When I hear certain words, they're almost alien. I hear them and I'm like, I have no sense of what that means.
Yeah.
And so I think that word comes up and it just is completely foreign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, but let the part know you get that's what it would like to do if it trusted it was safe and
Yeah.
that you'll work in that direction. And ask it how old it thinks you are. And don't think of the answer, just wait and see what
Okay.
comes.
49.
Thinks you're a few years younger. Okay.
Yeah. Younger than I am right now.
Yeah.
I was a grown up when I was very young in a certain
Okay.
way.
Okay.
And I think that really settled in there.
So it's had to take on this kind of adult,
Yeah.
almost parenting role from a very early age. Is that right?
100%.
So let it know you get that. It got stuck in this role very early on, and it wasn't fair. And now you want to help it be more whimsical. See how that sounds to it.
Yeah. I can feel an internal reluctance, but I can feel a real desire.
Yeah. So go to the reluctance. Is it coming from that same part?
It is.
And again, ask what it's afraid would happen. Is it the nobody's going to drive the vehicle, or what's the fear now?
It won't get done the way I want it to get done.
Okay. So it
That,
has some pretty high standards.
yeah, yeah, that's like instantaneous. But again, what's right on that and behind it is that there's a limitation in that.
Yeah.
Like they're going side by side,
Yeah. Okay. So let it know you get that it's had these high standards that made you a world class volleyball player and so on. But maybe it's not needed now as much.
No, it's not.
We'll see if the part agrees.
It definitely, that part knows that.
Okay. All right. So ask it what it needs from you going forward to help it start to trust this more and not have to have you being productive all the time.
What comes up is this idea of trying to control outcome,
Hmm.
because in a way, what I feel when I ask that part of myself is it works, but it actually works less than another way.
That's right. So
And
it wants you to remind it that it doesn't have to control outcomes so much.
well, because in a way, maybe outcome will be greater if that's the real thing, if you let go of that. And I think maybe early, I had a friend say to me once, like you're a hammer through, hammer down, but now you're trying to wash the windows. It's like something else. And I think maybe some of this was very good for my earlier life,
Right.
but I'm in a long marriage. I'm a mother. It's like that stunts. It actually stunts, even if you're trying to do work and do other things, it actually limits you. I'm not going to actually be more productive.
Right. So we could take it another step if you wanted, but you've already done a lot. So
Okay, well, I won't, I won't use your time for just me personally, but it is, it is always a really interesting reminder when we do have the right questions to ask ourselves, how much of the answers are in there.
that's right. Yeah, this was a good example of that, and how as you found with this was your big time protector who's been driving your vehicle
Oh
and
yeah.
is so tired, and how just a little dialogue with it, you can start to build a totally different relationship with it, and you can help it relax and trust you more because there is a Gabby who can run your life now that that couldn't back when this part got its job,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really know that yet. So
When you can't help but think also it's fake, right? Like in the way of, there's no matter what I could have done when I was younger, it's an unrealistic thought that I could run my life like an adult as a kid.
yeah,
And so in a way, is that the best person
yeah,
to be doing things?
exactly. And what was asking when I said, "Do you want to take the next step?" is if you were to ask it where it was stuck in the past,
Mm.
it would show you a scene or some time period where it got this role. And it would be a much younger child, probably.
Well, an
And
image of a place I grew up did show up for me, for
okay,
sure. I grew up in the Caribbean. I lived in Long Island, New York until I was 7, and then I moved to the Caribbean, and that's when I really put that did took that on. It came instantly when I was thinking about it.
all right. So, how old was that girl?
7 or 8.
Okay, all right. Let's do it. So, focus on that 7 or 8 year old girl, and tell me when you can see her again.
I can see outside of her eyes. I don't see her necessarily.
So you're seeing through her eyes.
Yes.
Okay, so you're right in there with her.
Oh,
So
yeah.
tell her to really let you get what life was like for her back then. Let you feel it and see it and sense it, everything about it.
Well, that's sort of when that rock in the pelvis landed, basically. It's that heaviness, that seriousness.
Mhm.
Um,
Does
yeah, it's
she
interesting.
does she feel like you get how bad all that was for her? She does?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, Gabby. So I want you to go to her in that scene, that time, and be with her in the way she needed somebody at the time. And just tell me when you're there with her.
I'm there.
How are you being with her?
It feels like a mixture of uh like I'm being fun, but I'm also in charge.
Yeah, good. That's what she needed, right? How's she reacting to having you there?
I can feel a lightness for sure.
Uh-huh. And ask her if she'd like to leave that time and place with you and come and live with you in your house or come to a fantasy place of her choice. Just ask if she's ready to come and be with you now.
Yeah, and the location is so specific.
Where?
It's at a house that I lived on in St. Thomas that was it was just particularly I think for that time very stressful
Yeah, okay. So is she ready to leave with you now?
for sure.
All right. And does she want to come to your house there or where does she want to go now?
I think it's I get a sense that she just wants to leave that place.
Yeah. Let's take her out of that place, but see where she wants to stay.
It what it feels like is there's enough like strength it doesn't it's like she does it's that me doesn't need now just needs to leave that place.
Okay. All right. So help her leave and tell me when she's out of there.
Yes.
And tell her you're going to look after her more this way. Does she seem to trust that?
Yeah, because the sense is like not a great deal of misery, just an over kind of seriousness
Yeah.
and vigilance. Not, not a scared
Yeah.
like I can't do it. It just sort of tired of doing it that way.
Okay. But now that she's out of there
Mhm.
and is connected to you, see if she wants to unload any of that seriousness or fear she carries from that time because she never has to go back to it.
It's true. What just came up for me now is like that time doesn't even exist.
Yeah,
It's like the wrong the wrong software for where we are, you
that's
know?
right. So would she like to unload some of that? Just ask her.
Okay. It, there's a there's not a concrete like coming back. It just has this feeling of like she just wants to go to the beach kind of thing.
All right, well, let's take her to the beach. Yeah,
Like she just wants to fucking go do something fun.
so take her there. Take her to the beach.
Yeah, it's very calm.
It's great. It's great. And ask her how often she'd like you to visit with her this way.
I It's not specific. It's just sort of like check on me from time to
Okay.
time.
You willing to do that?
I think I involuntarily do that anyway.
Okay. Are
you know?
you willing to make it voluntary though?
Absolutely.
So let her know you'll do that.
Okay.
Okay. And before we stop, just notice how that drive to be productive is feeling now versus when we started.
It's just the softness, it's sort of like this idea of not leaning or forcing, but just experiencing and doing. Like
Yeah.
instead of doing this interview, I could just be in this interview, if
Uh-huh.
that makes sense.
Totally. Totally.
And of course, if I'm leading it, then there's a certain task, but it's not with so much energy in that way.
Yeah. It's great.
I tried a long time ago. I try not to say I have to anymore. Like, even if I've said this many times, like going to the grocery store, it's like I'm going, I get to, because I was aware of this. And even, I'm going to work, not I have to go to work.
Well, I appreciate you doing it because I think it really did help your listeners get a sense of how this works. And
Yeah.
I suspect that a number of people could follow along with what you were doing and probably got some benefit out of it.
Do you have to go back in your own life? And, in doing the homework for this, I know that you're very calm and loving, but you mention in many interviews about maybe like an anger or something that sometimes comes up for you in your practice for yourself. How do you visit the parts of you that you need to?
Yeah, I've gotten pretty good at doing it on my own, although there are times I need help, like I helped you. I need to go to somebody, and sometimes it's my wife. She's an IFS person too, and but but she's the one who triggers me most of the time too. So that's a little complicated. But
It's kind of great.
uh-huh. But yeah, I mean, if you knew me 30 years ago, you'd know a very different person. And if I'm proud of anything, it's that I actually have done a lot of work on myself to get to this point where I am calm most of the time, and very few things can really trigger me and trigger that anger that used to be there a lot because of coming out of my family. Uh, and it actually helped me as an athlete. I was a college football player, and
So you took that anger with you and when you
totally,
go to hit somebody or what?
really, totally. I just, yeah, people were amazed at how strong I could get just when I was so angry because I was small. I'm pretty short and I was very fast, but I was very small to play college football. So my anger served me well, like your stoicism served you well, and your drive served you well during that time. But then it got in the way as I tried to be a leader of a movement and so on. So I had, you know, I really was forced to work with these parts. Yeah.
But it also makes you compassionate. So when you are guiding people and asking them questions, you yourself have had to look at all of the parts. And I haven't found from all of the interviews I've done, a lot of people create things because they need it or want it themselves.
Yeah. I think there's some truth to that for me. Uh, I I needed to do a lot of healing, and this was a way I could do it. And I also came out of my family with a lot of worthlessness because I was the oldest of six boys, and my father was a very prominent physician researcher, and I was supposed to do that, but I had ADD, and so I couldn't. And he was very hard on me about it. Uh, so I needed to prove myself somehow. And when this kind of fell into my lap, I really took off on it just to prove that I wasn't worthless.
So somebody who has five brothers, then, and maybe someone listening to this, maybe they're grown up, maybe it's not just about themselves, but they would like to shift either the family they created's dynamic or the trickier family, the family they were born into dynamic. Is there, do you have suggestions? Like I said, let's use you. You have five brothers. Have there been times where you found a way? Because I'd imagine if you experienced that, they all had their own version of how it impacted them. Were you able to shift any of the dynamics either with your parents or your siblings, or did you ever attempt to do that?
Yeah, particularly as I became more what I call self-led. I I didn't take the bait all the time from the various things that people would say, and I could kind of see past their protectors to their vulnerable, exiled parts that were driving them. So I could actually stay compassionate. And when I wasn't, a muddle with all these protective reactions, then I could, I could be a resource for them after I developed the model and stuff. And so it was very gratifying to actually, my father asked me for a bunch of sessions, and I did some work with him, and some brothers have. And so the model has been a way that I can actually reorganize my family relationships, including with my daughters, actually, who uh, were angry at me for quite a while because to create this, it took me out of the family much more than they would like. They called IFS the fourth sibling and the preferred sibling. And so, especially lately, we've been able to talk about a lot of that, and things are a lot better. A lot of healing has happened in our relationships, and we're all kind of using the language and using the model. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I feel like somehow we get sold that it's supposed to be a certain way, whatever, a family dynamic. And I don't know that anyone's ever had it that way. So it's an interesting thing. We have these examples or are these messages about the way families are supposed to be, parents, husbands and wives, children. And what you realize is everybody's showing up the best that they can and, kind of wounding themselves, wounding each other. And maybe I've tried to look at it so differently of maybe that's exactly normal. And the job is to do that work, to move to the place where, and you talk about it a lot, being your authentic self.
Mhm.
Because what
Yeah.
holds us is that comparison of, oh, we're not that, and I'm not that. And so something's wrong versus, hey, we're right on time. it's all good. Now we can get to work.
Yeah, we have a concept of uh, you have people in your lives that are your tormentors with a hyphen between the tor and the mentor. So by tormenting you, they're mentoring you about what you need to heal. So my wife is a great tormentor of mine because she has a uncanny way of bringing forth these parts that I need to that are stuck, back with my father and back in the past that I actually need to heal. And so we've been able to be that for each other, and family members often are that for each other. And so, in a sense, not at first, but after a while, I can welcome the triggers because it's taking me places I hadn't got to yet.
Yeah, you're leveling up.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is there rules around maybe if you're working with a family or clients where it's like, hey, and I know it's hard to enforce, but like practices, alcohol, certain recreational or drugs, like it, because a lot of people will use things to medicate and do that. Is there sort of conversations around, hey, can we shelve that for a while and really kind of do this as in the most sober way possible?
Yeah, but it's still a different approach because say you were say that was an issue for you and your family was upset about it and you were pushing them away and trying to minimize it and deny and so on. If I were to work with you, I would have you find that alcoholic part and do something similar to what we just did. But in listening to it and asking these questions, like I would have you ask it, what's it afraid would happen if it didn't get you drunk all the time? And it would say, you would feel all the pain that is in there. I would say, if we could heal that pain, would you have to do this for her all the time? And the part would usually say, no, but I don't think you can do that. So we would negotiate permission to heal the pain and then come back. And now this alcoholic part doesn't want to do that anymore. Wants to do something entirely different. Like you're pushing, your productive part wants to actually be in the present and just wait and see what happens. So that's what we find. Even these parts that are ruining people's lives, when approached from this very open, curious, loving way, will reveal their secret histories of how they got into their roles and also reveal that they don't like having to do it. If they really trusted they didn't have to, they wouldn't.
I I always find it fascinating that if somebody said to me, let's say, "Hey, there's a better way. It's just different than the way you're doing it, and the outcome's going to be more of what you want." There's still a part of us that goes, "Yeah, no, I need to do it the way I know. I'm more comfortable with that." So if people are thinking about this and experiencing that, that's completely natural
Right.
to want to continue to do the same behavior because the change is scary.
Change is scary. It's a fear based resistance.
Yeah.
And so I become what I call a hope merchant. I'm selling hope to hopeless systems. And I'm saying, take your time, but I promise you, I absolutely promise you, you'll like this change. It's going to be scary for a while. I'll be right there with you. But yeah, I'm a salesman to these inner systems. I'm selling hope to these protectors that there's something in it for them to actually let us do a lot of healing.
We did an example with me and my, if we talk about like, would you trade your stuff with other people? And my stuff it's minimal, right? It's like, it's fine. How, what happens when you have somebody who, let's say, for example, a pretty intense sexual trauma or, um, maybe a boy who had a violent father. What does unwrapping that look like? And maybe you can give an example of somebody that you've worked with where what that process looked like and then how they were on the other side of that.
Well, I've worked with, that was my population for 20 years. So I've worked with many, many of those scenarios and with a lot of very successful people who uh, successfully, quote unquote, left all that in the past. And it wasn't until they come to me for some symptom they're having, and we focus on the symptom, and it's the part that's trying to get their attention that they locked away years ago.
You mean like a depression or an anxiety or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah, all that or medical symptoms.
Mm.
I can have you focus on a medical symptom, and it'll take us to a part that's saying, "We're in here, deal with us. If you don't, we're going to kill you." And but yeah, like depression or anxiety or something like that. And so it's a tough sell to the parts of them that have gotten them that far in that MO. By like I just today worked with a guy who said, uh, I just focus on the bright side. I don't. Some really bad things happen to me, but I've gotten this far by not thinking about that. I just don't think about those things, and I only think about the good things. And it's hard to argue with that because it did help him get as far as he's gotten. But my pitch was yes, and your relationships aren't great. As soon as a woman wants you to be exclusive to her, you get terrified and you run away.
Mm.
And if you let us go in and be with some of that pain, we could fix that. But his parts kept going back to, but that's okay. I don't need to be with a woman, exclusively. And I like this open relationship thing I've got going. And so, yeah, it can be a tough sell, like I'm saying.
Yeah.
But if the protectors will let us go there, we can do a thing like what we did with you, which is to see where that girl was stuck in the past and get her out of there. And it does make a big difference.
Is there a way that this is a tool that it's sort of, I don't want to say self improvement, but let's say someone's like, hey, I'm just trying to be the best version of myself. There's nothing really specific I'm pointing to. What does that exploration look like?
Yeah. So if you came to me with that, you were my client, I would just say, okay. So there's no specific part you want to work on, but just take a second, focus inside, and notice what's happening in your body, or notice if there is something that needs attention in there. And most people will say, okay, well, yeah, I do notice this this pressure on my shoulder. Okay, let's get curious about that. Let's see what that is. And in getting curious about it, they'll learn about some part that again wants their attention or is angry at them for not listening. So
So just by going in and checking in, they'll be able to start to follow the breadcrumbs to sort of figuring out
yeah,
what's going on with them.
yeah, follow what we call the trailhead. So
Yeah.
there are trails and they have heads, and if you follow the trail to the trailhead, then you come to a good place. Yeah, you learn stuff.
So Dick, what's your final hope? I know you have the workbook coming out again. I want to remind people it's available for pre-order. Do they have to know anything before diving into the workbook, or do you suggest reading No Bad Parts or being more familiarized with internal family systems?
I think the workback book is pretty self-explanatory.
Okay.
It wouldn't hurt to do some of that background reading. We've
Mm-hmm.
been talking a lot about relationships, and the book I wrote that people like the most about that is called "You're the One You've Been Waiting For,"
Yeah.
and that it doesn't sound like it, but it's all about how we're always looking for somebody out here but actually it's in here that connect should take care of ourselves. So yeah, people like that book a lot.
Why do you, what is it in this work that you get out of it that you're still, I mean, you've been doing this a long time and you continue to keep tweaking it and do new things. What is it that you're seeing and learning and getting out of it that just keeps you going?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I get that question from a lot of people, including family members.
Your daughter specifically?
Yeah, I got it sometimes. And I love it. I feel like I was given this gift to bring, and I'm so privileged to be able to do it. And I love doing it. I loved the time we had with your parts. I love watching people heal from it. And um, so I'm not going to stop until I can't keep doing it for some reason. And and also I got this vision of the possibility of this 40 years ago, or maybe 35 years ago, and kept thinking, boy, I hope the person comes along who can take it where it's supposed to go, because this could change so many things at so many levels.
Yeah.
And it turns out I'm that person, but I happen to now be able to collaborate with a lot of other people who are taking it to these higher levels of system and using it to transform corporations, nonprofits, a lot of social activism stuff. So that's got my excitement now is, can we really expand this vision to bring it to these very high levels?
Yeah, and make it cultural, because
Yeah,
I also feel like if these are practices that we learn and we can teach our younger children and they have going forward, because the idea of I can accept myself, think about how much easier it is for me to accept and love another person. And
that's
I
exactly
think that
right.
it's such a valuable tool.
And so often as parents, there's a part of us we don't like. And when we see that part in our kids, we'll shame them for having that. But if we could come to value that part in us, then we're not going to lay that on our kids. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Dr. Richard Schwartz, I really appreciate your time. You're only the third person in maybe 7 years of podcasting that's ever made me weepy. So thank you for that.
You're
And,
welcome.
and the 7 or 8 year old or 49-year-old in me says thank you. I think it's always important to be surprised. I know you must get a lot of people, especially high achieving, maybe some macho CEOs, and they're like, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm, I really appreciate your being such a good sport and letting us muck around in there.
Hey, talk is cheap. You know, you got to be willing to throw your hat in there,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Really, really grateful to you. And turns out you're pretty good at this too.
Oh, well. So just a quick reminder, No Bad Parts is one of the books, and IFS, the internal family systems, is the system, and people can find you online. And I love the idea of a workbook because that is a very powerful tool. So thank you for creating that. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Gabby. I'm really delighted to get to know you and to talk with you today.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for listening. So thanks again for joining me and listening to the Gabby Reece Show. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if anything showed up today that you find would be helpful to someone you know, pass it along and make sure to share with us what really resonated and stood out for you in this conversation. Thanks again for joining us. Keep going, and I'll see you next time.